how do you get from a society's conception, maybe definition of well-being to something that is actually both measurable and then actionable?
I think first it's probably important to ensure the desired outcome is something that actually aligns with what individuals and communities want to see. So, for example, just simply because an academic identifies something as being a positive outcome, do we know if that's what the people actually want? So I think having a subjective view of a person's well-being or happiness is an important factor, and then being able to kind of relate that to other factors, we could actually gain a deeper insight into see what factors are actually relevant to higher levels of subjective well-being.
Well, one thing I love about this file, that is the quality of life and well-being work, which I am lucky enough to do as my full-time job, is this idea of the positive focus. Where are you aiming? So I spent most of my career up until this time really focused on those problems. So the under the threshold component of the work. So social assistance policy, violence against women in shelters, food security, housing policy, income support, that sort of thing. So that's really been most of my career focus. And what I love about the well-being frame is, yes, those things are still important, but it also invites you to look above those minimums towards more of a maximum. Where are we aiming? What do we value as a society? What is intrinsically good? It takes you to those places like parks. I mean, who thought of the park system in terms of its value? The sort of cost-benefit analysis frame can sometimes help, have us forget those intrinsic values. And I know, your work and others has really aimed to address that, concretely by trying to value some of those intrinsic goods. I think it shifts the calculus so that it's less about optimizing within a small frame and more about looking broadly, what makes a good life, what makes a good society, that longer term frame. And I think it's not that necessarily you don't still have to do that other work. It's that more things become possible. Your solution space is broader. You're building things that create positive interactions rather than just being focused on the sort of negative space of unmet needs.
It's incredibly difficult, especially given, like I said, that uniqueness factor and those elements that change. And then looking at those self-defined determinants or indicators, ways that we measure it, which, speaking again, because our work is only with First Nations people in BC, really, because of First Nations communities and how they governed and structured and all those pieces were stolen and is being remembered and rebuilt and reintegrated into modern government. There are those unique factors within those nations and communities that they have to define, and that's really hard work to dig into the definition that I struggled over at the beginning of what is well-being, and then looking at even more so is if you can define it, how do you go to measure that? And then being able to use that measurement to actually go backwards and say, as a government, well, we implemented this policy or we implement this law, and it's going to change this in how much time and by how much. I mean, those are all pieces of a process that I don't think we've gotten right yet in any society that I know of. And in so many ways, First Nations are at the point where they're redefining or relearning those as a nation. And the last piece for government there would be adjustment. So knowing those determinants will change, those people will change their definition of them, how those inputs result in an output is going to change depending on factors. Also, we're just going to get it wrong. That fluidity has to be built in, which makes it even harder.
To me, I think that, one of the main measures that we use, of course, for getting at how people feel about their lives is the life satisfaction measure. And I like to kind of start there because it's kind of a democratic way of getting at how people feel about their own lives as they're living them in their own individual context. And that allows us to sort of see, how people are different, but how they're the same and what sort of patterns arise. And to me, where the measurable bits come in are in the determinants of measures of subjective well-being, like life satisfaction. So I think we'll probably talk about the quality of life framework that I work on in the statistics program probably a little bit later, but it's 84 measures. A couple of them are sort of these high-level subjective well-being measures, but most of them are what I would call the determinants of well-being. And those tend to be kind of things that you can influence with policy, where we have resources attached to them, where there are interventions, programs, policy that aims to sort of increase them or decrease them, as the case may be. So that's sort of where I think kind of the measurement comes in. Like, you can measure subjective well-being, but you often can't intervene directly on it. You can only get at people's subjective sense of how their lives are by sort of improving the conditions within which they live and enabling them to live in ways that are self-determining and allow them to thrive.